All right, what's going on, everybody? Today is Friday, August 8th, 2025. Bitcoin block height 909,174. And now 175. New block found. Transaction fees 3 sats per VByte across the board. Low, medium, and high priority. And boom, another block, 176, just found. Just under 104,000 unconfirmed transactions in this mempool. So we're seeing some blocks, and we still got over 100,000 unconfirmed transactions. That's nice. 2 blocks. One with 4,600 transactions, the other with 3,200 transactions. People starting to use Bitcoin. For what though? What y'all using it for? I'm the Bitcoin police. Let me check your transactions. Any op return data in there? Any inscriptions? We don't allow those things. We make sure. Oh, what's this? A batch payment. Is that allowed? Blockchain policing. It's getting heavy. But still, my question remains out there. An open question to all the Nostr users. If you run a Bitcoin Nostr node, if you run the Nostr software, why is the default data 42 bytes? Op return, data carrier size, data carrier limit. Why is it set to 42 bytes by default? Why not 0? Very, very curious about that decision. Does that mean that some things are acceptable? Hey, there we go. Another block, 177 with 4,500 transactions in it. And this has been mine. 2 sats per VByte. 0.17 going from this address and splitting it up to all these addresses. 2,100 Satoshis. So I don't know what's going on here. Damn. Why would you even do that? That's the opposite of UTXO management. That's bad. But who knows? Maybe it has some sort of use. I don't know what's going on here, right? If it meets the rules of the protocol, people pay the fee. Should it be allowed? Yeah, I lean towards that side. I understand the other argument about the JPEGs, it's worthless. And yeah, I would say that the pictures are worthless. But who gets to decide? And to that, I would say the nodes. Let the nodes decide. I'm fine with people changing the Bitcoin configuration file and putting transaction size down to 0 bytes if they want. Do it. You should be able to configure your node any way you see fit. That's the beauty of Bitcoin. I'm just curious why Nostr defaults to 42 if most of the users are so up in arms about the data and they don't want any data. Why wouldn't it default to 0? Now, I do know a few people, not personally though, but I have seen online on Twitter and possibly Nostr, where they run a Bitcoin node and they run the Nostr software and they set theirs to 80 or 83 bytes, the old core default, which it was raised, there's some history to that, but they run it at 80 bytes. Which seems like a more reasonable response, a reasonable rate, because I don't like spam on the Bitcoin blockchain. It's just the question is, what is spam and who determines what is spam? And I would say I like it as the nodes. I'm not against knots. I don't know if it comes off that I'm against knots. I'm not against knots, but I am against the 0 bytes. I definitely think Bitcoin is useful for more things, specifically naming, specifically Spaces protocol, you know, when done right, naming done right, we do have a bunch of naming protocols or ideas running out there. You know, no one has really been able to solve naming, but I do think that Spaces protocol is the best that we've seen, and it's still under development, so it's still going through. But if you were on Knots, let me know. Post a comment. Hit me up on X. Why is it the default 42 bytes and not 0? You know, it flies in the face of all these people that are saying, you know, these diehards that are like, they're rude as shit, you know, and it's fine. You could be rude if you want. I could be rude too, but I usually don't want to be rude. You know, sometimes I am because it's funny. I find humor in talking shit. It is hilarious. You know, but when you try to be professional and you want to get your point across, you shouldn't, like cursing, you know, swearing. I say curse words. I don't really want to do that. So I have to stop doing that. I don't like doing that. It turns a lot of people off. So, you know, that's just one thing. But online, yeah, you know, people that respond, the core people, they're rough, dude. They're, you know, toxic Bitcoin, maximalist, toxicity, toxic Bitcoin. And sure, there's a place for that. We need some of that. We can't just be nice forever. People can't, but whatever. I ain't speaking for anyone else. I speak for myself. But me personally, I don't want to be rude, really. Just because there's really no reason to be rude. But hearing responses that people are talking about putting data on Bitcoin, Knots people's come out and they're rough, dude. They're just wild. And they're so strong against any data. And they're like, I got mine set to 0. 0. And fine, you could do that. But why is the default setting 42? Are the developers, what's his name? There's a guy, Luke Dash Jr. Luke, if you're out there, is Luke trying to say something by setting it to 42 bytes? And all his henchmen, all his followers are setting it down to 0. But y'all ain't following Luke's vision. Luke sets it at 42. So I was just really curious, you know, just that's an interesting topic right there. And I'd rather just talk normal, because here's the thing too, right? Here's the thing too. You start acting tough online. You're a tough guy. You start acting real tough online, and it's just disingenuous, because I would never say that to your face, because it's not worth it. There's no reason to be all aggressive and be like, F you, you know, in your face and be crazy like that. And you wouldn't either. You know, most people wouldn't either. But online, there's no repercussions. So everybody online can act any way they want. So that enables them to act out and F off and curse you out. Because there's no repercussions. There's nothing that you could do in retaliation. But if I do that online, for me personally, I just feel like I'm being disingenuous, because I wouldn't treat you like that in person. So why would I do that online? You know, I like to keep the same energy, keep it real, keep it the same way online, just so I can be true to myself. You know, it really doesn't have anything to do with other people. Even though, yeah, I want to be courteous to people. I want to be nice. I don't want to be rude. But I just want to be true to myself. I don't want to be some fake thing online. Unless I'm trying to be something like, you know, a salesman of some sort, or, you know, whatever. You could go down that route, like, oh, business, you're trying to sell, you know, I don't know. It's just something that I think about, you know, all these people talking shit online. You know, are you physically fit? Are you able? You know, that's why I like sports a lot too, because sports really separates people. You can talk a lot of shit, but then you get out on the field. Are you even good? You know, can you even do anything? So what are you talking shit for? You know, you ain't talking shit now, right? You know, so it's just, I don't know, but people like to do it. People like to talk shit. So anyway, 42 bytes. If you know why not to set to 42 bytes, let me know. Me personally, I mean, I'm running core right now, but you know, another thing is too, motherfuckers, people don't even run nodes, man. I mean, people don't even be running nodes. This is just such a small subset of people. But this is the real deal, though. Running a node is important. It took me a while to do it, but hey, I'm doing it. Cheers to that. Running a node. I'm running core. I don't even know what version it is. Maybe 28.28, whatever it is. Something like that. Something like that. 2.9, maybe. Perhaps. All right, Bitcoin USD price. 116,644 US pieces of paper. 24-hour high was 117,687. 24-hour low was 115,673. So I was hoping that we dipped down below 100K here before I hopped in and made a purchase. We touched 112 a couple times, back up to 115, back down to 112. Now we're sitting at 116. I don't know. I'm probably beat. We're probably never going to see these numbers again. And if we do, it'll be after a long blow off top. So I guess I just had to deal with it and buy it at 116. 116 is still cheap. I was just hoping I could get more Satoshis for my dollar. Right now, $1 US gets you 857 Satoshis. Bitcoin Spaces protocol, 1.5095 total Bitcoin burned, 8,148 bids, 2,511 transfers and registers, and 2,611 rollouts. Spaces in auction, BF, document, LM, OR, register, anchor, eclipse, eclipse, yeah, ellipse, elliptical, ellipse, eclipse. All right, you got to check the spelling on those. JPEG and KM, claimable in about 7 hours and 10 minutes. Unconfirmed Spaces actions, we got 3 bids. HM, HC, and BZ. Recent Spaces actions, transfers on RT, BS, some Puni codes, Springer Nature, Trezor, MasterCard, and 2 bids on MP3 and Lightning. All right, Lightning might be a popular one. We'll see how far that goes. Yesterday's rollouts, we saw Crystal, 360, peace sign emoji, the dark version, OT, GP, Sultan, Press, NB, 365, and peace sign emoji, the darkest version, darkness. Upcoming rollouts, we got DVPN, HU emoji, OX or 0x, PRN, Prawn, ads, ADS, MP4, XML, RO, TK, and MN. Now, there was somebody in the Telegram, Joe. Shout out to Joe if you're watching. He was talking about Spaces protocol and he just doesn't see it, how it's going to work with Nostr and NIP 05, Nostr Improvement Proposal number 5. That's never going to change and all this and all that stuff, you know. And I mean, dude, really? You really think that Nostr is just going to use DNS forever? You don't think that the people, like Bitcoin people, Nostr people, if we're looking for permissionless stuff, we're looking for open source code and decentralized things, you don't think people are going to migrate to a permissionless system, a decentralized open source naming system like Spaces protocol? You really think that Nostr is going to rely on DNS forever? I mean, come on. I don't think so. It just doesn't make sense. And there were some good responses. People responded to him. You know, Buffer was saying like, yo, it's still early in Nostr and it's not set in stone. Like the UX isn't final. There's really nothing great out there. It's just Twitter clones. And Spaces protocol makes it easier for naming with Nostr. You know, just like we have IP addresses and we have DNS converts those. Spaces protocol is a permissionless DNS system. And I know there was another argument as well. I think it was from the same guy. This was over on Nostr itself. and it was about how, you know, Spaces Protocol really isn't permissionless. It's just authority permissioned or something, because the protocol permissions it. And I get that argument too. I understand that argument. But I would say to that, yo, the Bitcoin isn't permissionless either then, right? If you're saying that, because Bitcoin has rules in it as well. The protocol has rules. So if you're saying that the Spaces protocol isn't permissionless because you have to abide by the protocol rules, so if you register a name like LM, then it's already taken because Spaces protocol says LM is taken. Well, that would be the same as like saying Bitcoin's not permissionless because there's only 21 million Bitcoin. And if I wanted to create 22 million Bitcoin, I can't because I'm limited by the rules of the protocol. Or if I wanted to spend somebody else's Bitcoin, but I can't because I don't have the private key to that. You know, it's the same thing here. Like, you don't have the private key to LM, so therefore you can't use it. It's not your name, right? This someone else's name. They have the key for the private key. Same thing with Bitcoin. So it is permissionless in that sense. Anyone can use it. You're not being limited or not stopped. But yes, there's rules in the protocol. There's only a certain amount of names, and some names are taken. It's the same thing with the Bitcoin. Some Bitcoin's taken. Now you could say, okay, well, maybe I'll extend that further, the argument, and say, well, Bitcoin's fungible and Spaces Protocol is not fungible because they're unique names. Well, yes, in a sense, but you could also say that that's one of Bitcoin's weakest points is fungibility, because you can see the exact history, and actually that specific coin, while it is like all the other coins, it is different as well from all the other coins, being that it's in your wallet, that specific address secured by that specific private key. So it's limited to just the owner of the private key. And I think it really just goes down to that, where ownership online, digital ownership, is going to be provable by keys. He who has the key signs the transaction, opens the goods, unlocks the goods, owns the product. Everything's going to be like that. So right now we have HTTPS, where that's a centralized certificate authority that signs on everyone's behalf. You know, that's an entity that signs, not you. You're not signing through HTTPS. So when you send a credit card payment or something like that, that could all be rerouted by the people that are in control of those keys, the HTTPS certificate authority. You know, Spaces Protocol fixes that as well, where it's actually your keys that are signing. And I think this is very deep. It's huge. It's a huge change in the way we think. ICANN, DNS, HTTPS, they're so ingrained in the way we use the internet that we can't imagine a world without it. We can't imagine a system that would come in and supplant all those things. So we think that it's phony, right? There's just no way that could actually happen. And there is a way, though. There is a way. All these technologies like Blockbuster or whatever, you think that they're never going anywhere, like the US dollar. You know, all these things that we just have become accustomed to and we're so used to it. We're just like, there is just no way in hell that will ever go away. But actually they do. They do. They go away. And how do they go away? Just by having superior technology come along and just say, why would I trust someone else to sign with HTTPS when here's a solution, Spaces Protocol, that I could use and sign myself? It's the same thing with your money. Why would you trust a bank, a third party, to send your money, to hold your money, to own your money, when you could just own it yourself? You just cut out the middleman. So that's what Spaces Protocol does. It just removes the middleman in naming. And it's super early, it's hard to believe, but once it becomes useful and people start using it and subspaces get built out, and we do have news on that if you watch the community update yesterday. The plan is October 1st, we will see subspaces released. Bless you. And that's when it'll be on mainnet. So it'll be on Bitcoin and it'll be working. So we're going to see craziness. It only uses 32 bytes of data, which is funny because it's under the 42 default of NOTS nodes. So all the spaces will be on all the NOTS nodes as well. And is that acceptable? 32 bytes of data? Is that acceptable to people? I think it is. Bitcoin is useful to send messages. You know, we have TD Bank, Fidelity or something. They put an image on Bitcoin. I don't think that's useful, but they did it. Fedimint put something in op return. I guess that kind of was useful for them, you know, but either way, they did it. It's permissionless. Are you going to stop them? Maybe, but that's the thing about the nodes too. All right, your node doesn't relay the transactions if they're above a certain limit, but does that mean they don't exist? You know, it's kind of like putting in earbuds or like ear whatever, the things that block you, the foam things that block the sound for your ear. I don't know what they're called, but I never use them. That's why I can't hear. That's why I'm always yelling. And you're putting that in, but does that mean that music isn't playing? Did you stop the music? No, the music's still going on. The sounds are still going on. It goes back to the fundamental question, the age-old question: if a tree falls in the forest but nobody's there to hear it, does it make a sound? And that would lead me to say, what is a sound then? Okay, does it make a sound? What is a sound? And then you would say, for this one, it would be like, is that a transaction, an op return? If the node doesn't relay it, well, then what is a transaction? So we would have to go down that route. We would have to define things. So I don't know. It's very interesting though. You know, I make these videos. This is awesome. It's super early naming on Bitcoin, even Bitcoin itself, Bitcoin development, running a node and verifying your transactions and not having to wait for any third party, man. This is awesome. And digital IDs and all these centralized IDs and social credit system and all this stuff is coming. And what are you going to do? What do you think you're going to do? You're just going to sit around and just be like, oh no, I'm not going to use that. What are you going to use? What are you going to use, right? You're going to use this. You're going to use Spaces protocol. That's what you're going to use. You're going to use Bitcoin. The same private key that secures your Bitcoin will secure your identity through Spaces protocol. And of course, probably, I don't know, of course, but probably not, you would have your Bitcoin stash somewhere else and you wouldn't toy with that. You wouldn't like mess with that private key anyway with anything else. And so you would just have different private keys, maybe with a little bit of Bitcoin that would have your identity on it. So yeah, you know, sure, right? You have multiple wallets. You wouldn't want to have everything in one basket. All right, Spaces.market here. Latest listings. So these are just spaces, top level spaces that secondary market that people just put up for sale. You can see the seller addresses here. And what we have latest listings is 7, Obey, CH, Sam, Dave, DP, Charm, Verify, and NI. All right, that's going to be it for this one. Thank you all for watching.